And welcome again to the Dave LewAllen Podcast. We cover sports stories, newsmakers, and difference makers in our community. You find us on YouTube, any of your favorite platforms for podcasts, Spotify, Apple, all the rest. And today we're thrilled to have with us Tom Gage, longtime baseball beat writer for the Detroit News, won the Spink Award, Michigan Journalism Hall of Fame, Michigan Sports Hall of Fame as well for his long career writing baseball. And one of the most popular Tigers ever, Lance Parrish, the former catcher. Big Wheel, as he was called back in the day. 324 career home runs, managed in the minors after his playing career, was a coach with the Tigers as well. Tom and Lance are here to talk about a new book, talking about the 1984 championship season, the World Series champion Detroit Tigers. The book is The Enchanted Season. Lance Parrish with Tom Gage. And Tom covered those Tiger teams 36 years as the baseball beat writer for the Detroit News. Tom, welcome. Lance, great to have both of you here today.
Thank you.
And it's 40 years. I mean, first of all, how can that be?
Exactly. I don't know. It's time flies when you're having fun. Huh? So yeah, but I think that was the thing that motivated this project. It's the fact that it is our 40-year anniversary and planning on having a big get together down at the stadium later in the year. So we both thought that it would be a great idea to help people remember. The interesting thing is there's a lot of people that I've run into already that I ask them about 1984. They weren't even around in 1984. Yeah. So if they weren't around, it gives them an opportunity to live through those times and how special they were. And for those that experienced it, just a chance to reminisce about just a great baseball year in the state of Michigan.
Great baseball year and a great baseball team, Tom. And you were right there every day covering that team. And it was a process, right? Bringing guys on, getting better, 81, 82, 83,
Absolutely, Dave. I mean, 83 was a great year. And, when Sparky was hired in 79, he started, he had that My Way or the Highway. And some of the guys, Rusty Staub, Aurelio Rodriguez, they were let go.
Yeah.
And then he started adding people like Tom Brookins, and of course Lance was already on the team, and they just grew and matured together.
Yep. And 1984, the 35-5 start, of course, 104 wins on the season. And one of the big things in remembering the 1984 season was the trade that was made in spring training, right? Glenn Wilson, John Walkenfuss go to the Phillies. Willie Hernandez and Dave Bergman come to the Tigers. And if there was a team building that happened, maybe those were the final two pieces.
Well, the thing is, Dave, that Glenn Wilson was immensely popular with his teammates. And at the end of spring training, I think a lot of those Tigers didn't understand the deal. I mean, Willie had had a good National League career, but he wasn't yet the pitcher that he would become for the Tigers. Walkenfuss was kind of a complainer, and he wanted out, and then he wanted back in when he got traded. He regretted, I think, the fact that he was traded. But Glenn Wilson was one of Lance's best friends, and I think
he was.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think you understood the deal when it was made, did you?
Well, I mean, I was just a player and a teammate.
Sure.
Obviously, I wasn't privy to what the building process was looking like or what we were trying to really do ultimately. I knew that we were creating a nucleus of young talent that had come through our system. And I certainly thought that Glenn Wilson was part of that package. Glenn Wilson, Jason Thompson, Steve Kemp, there was a few guys, Rick Leach, that I thought, okay, these are the guys that they're putting together to try to build a championship ball club.
But the important thing about that deal was Willie got most of the attention for what he did on the field, but nobody knew that Dave Bergman was going to be such a great addition for in the clubhouse and as in the area of leadership of that team.
Yeah.
And he proved to be.
Well, I mean, it wasn't like Dave was the everyday first baseman.
Right.
And Darrell Evans came over that year too. And I would say, well, you mentioned in the book that, Darrell Evans and Dave Bergman both, not only their contributions on the field, but off the field in the clubhouse, demonstrated great leadership on our ball, which is what we needed. We were still young and a little rough around the edges. And I think Darrell and Dave both stepped up and helped us all mature a little bit more and understand the game a little bit more and, try to stay focused on what we were trying to accomplish. So, whatever they contributed on the field was great, but I think what they contributed in our clubhouse was probably way more important than what they could have contributed on the field.
But Hernandez, I mean, the impact he ultimately had, I mean, Cy Young Award winner, MVP, closing games, and not just like today where you're getting an out or two.
Right.
I mean, he pitched 2 or 3 innings. I mean, he did it over and over and over again. It was a monster year.
It was, and what gets overlooked is that even before he started saving games, Aurelio Lopez was a vital part of the team because he was Willie Hernandez in April. And until Willie really began to be effective, Lope, was the man.
Yeah.
So they had parts, somebody for every need.
As you look back 40 years later, and you tell the stories in the book, The Enchanted Season, what comes flooding back first, I guess?
Well, I mean, I think the thing that everybody will always remember about that '84 team was our 35-5 start. I'm pretty sure nobody on the ball club could believe that we had gone 35-5. And maybe even more impressive than the 35-5 was we started out 17-0 on the road. So, putting that stretch together was kind of mind-boggling when it was happening. I mentioned in the book that when we won our 35th game, I sat down back at the hotel and was like, I can't even believe this myself. 40 games at the major league level, and we've won 35 of them. I mean, nobody does that. And I'm not so sure that anybody ever will duplicate that. I'm just saying.
Yeah.
But, it was just an amazing start. I think once we had gotten to that point, it was like guys might have started to feel a little bit more pressure than they did. It's like, how are we going to maintain this? This is like next to impossible. But, it was a grind in the middle of the schedule, but, we picked up the pace later on in the year. So.
And 104 wins, sweep the Royals, beat the Padres 4-1 to win the World Series. Man, you talk about storybook.
Yeah.
Well, Dave, what I personally enjoyed about the book was learning about Lance's life other than 1984. I mean, he was born in Pennsylvania and then moved to California when he was 6. And what he went through in high school, the fact that he was drafted as a third baseman and why he was drafted as a third baseman. He thought that the Angels were going to draft him in the first round. And when it turned out to be the Tigers, he knew nothing about Detroit or the Tigers. And he went down to the coach's office after he had heard it, he'd been drafted. And one of his coaches says, "Hey, you're going to be playing for Ralph Houck." And Lance said, "Who's Ralph Houck?" So
You played ignorant.
You became a student of the game.
I did. Well,
more afterward.
I certainly was not a student of the game prior to that.
Yeah.
But, and I honestly, again, like Tom mentioned, I didn't know anything about the Detroit Tigers. And nowadays there's so many different venues to watch sports, follow sports. Back then it was very limited. It wasn't like I picked up the newspaper every day and read about, what was going on in the world of sports. And there was very few games on TV, if any. Plus I was always out running around doing something. So my knowledge of baseball was the Los Angeles Dodgers and the California Angels. We listened to Vin Scully, and my dad always had a game on whenever he was doing a project around the house. So that was my, world of baseball right there. So when I got drafted, actually my baseball coach pulled me out of one of my classes and said, he went to shake my hand. Congratulations, you're the number 1 pick of the Detroit Tigers.
You didn't have a watch party and all the things that happen today, huh?
one of my favorite stories in the book is about Lance as a young boy. he was very involved with a 4-H club, and that meant working in the summer with cattle and sheep and stuff like that. And he raised a steer one summer that he sold at auction. And what happened was close friends of his parents bought the steer and then invited them over for dinner one night. And they found out for steak. And Lance found out that he was eating the steer he had raised and had gotten so close to. And he said, "No way! I'm not eating my own." Yeah. He said,
It's like my dog.
"I wouldn't eat my dog. I'm not going to eat my steer."
Yeah, that's funny. That's funny. Weren't you play football too? I mean, wasn't there an opportunity to choose between football and baseball?
I was pretty fortunate in that I had an opportunity to go on quite a few recruiting trips. I at the end of the day, I decided I wanted to go to UCLA. It was closer to home. Dick Vermeil was the head football coach there at the time. Although, I went to USC with John McKay there, and, they were both just right down the road. I think my decision to go to the Bruins was just, I grew so close to a lot of the coaches there and, felt very comfortable around them. And, in hindsight, I might have wanted to pick USC because USC had a much better football program over the years. And the stipulation was that I was going to be on a football scholarship, but I was going to be allowed to play baseball as well. Don't really know how that would have ever played out, but that was the idea going in. And I also went on trips to Nebraska and Cal Berkeley and Arizona State. And so, it was a fun time. But, I think ultimately when it came down to it, my first love was always baseball. So when I got drafted by the Tigers, even though I wasn't prepared to pull the trigger right then and there when the scout for the Tigers showed up at my doorstep, I think eventually when I had a little bit of time to think about it, it was like, okay, this is what I want to do. Mm-hmm. And but the other part of that equation was I had never left home before, so I was the next day or within the next 2 days after I put my name on the contract, I was on a red eye to Tampa, and it was like, see a family.
Yeah.
It's a little scary, to be honest with you.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, and there's that story that when you checked into Fetzer Hall in Lakeland, he had been on the red eye and nobody had told him where to go or what the schedule was. So Lance checked into Fetzer Hall and then put his gear down and went to sleep. And then all of a sudden there was a big rapping on the door, and it turned out to be Hoot Evers. Go, you can tell the rest of the story.
Well, Hoot Evers at the time was our farm director, and and again, nobody told me what to do. My instructions were to get on a shuttle, go to Tiger Town, check into Fetzer Hall, and then wait for somebody to tell you what to do. Yeah. I didn't sleep the whole way on that. I was a nervous wreck, like, oh my gosh, what am I doing here? So when I finally got into my room, it was like I was ready to pass out, which I did.
Sure.
So I jumped in bed, and next thing I knew, boom, my door busts open and there's Hoot Evers, and I didn't know who he was.
Yeah.
And he, it wasn't like it was, hey, it's good to see you. He was in my face, right? What are you doing in bed? You should be out on the field. And I'm like, who are you? And so the next thing I know, I'd grab my stuff and I'm off to the locker room to get, fitted for a uniform and,
And of course, it's a June day.
Yeah, smoking hot.
Smoking hot in Lakeland.
And I had long sleeves on.
Welcome to professional
and they hit
baseball.
Me at third base. I was like, oh my gosh.
Yeah.
And then Hoot became a good friend of yours.
Yeah, I loved Hoot. He had, a rough exterior, but deep down he was a good guy.
Drafted as a third baseman, the catching thing became a reality how soon?
Well, shortly thereafter. I played my entire year in rookie ball at third base. In fact, I even made the All-Star team. Don't ask me how, but I made the All-Star team at third base. After that season was over, I went to instructional ball with a bunch of the other, guys. And when I got to instructional ball, Hoot Evers was there, and he said, so here's the deal. We're going to move you from third base to catcher, which wasn't a big deal to me because, honestly, I had caught from Little League all the way through high school. I was used to catching. I was actually more surprised they drafted me as a third baseman than they switched me to catcher. But along with that conversation, we're going to switch you to catcher. He says, and we're going to make you a switch hitter. And I'm like, a switch hitter? I said, but I've never switch hit before. He goes, that's all right. He says, with that short porch in right field in Detroit, if you ever figure this out, there's no telling how many home runs you might hit. And I go, but I've never switch hit before, you know? So the other part of that crazy story is, so I went to, when instructional ball started, I'm out there, you know, hitting left-handed for the first time and trying to figure it out. Well, come next spring training and into the season, next year I went to Lakeland and played in A-ball.
Yeah.
So back then, you only had one coach. You had a manager and you had a coach. That was it. So Stubby Overmeyer was my manager. You know,
Yeah.
I'm sure you've heard of Stubby
Yeah,
Overmeyer.
yeah.
He's like a 5'8", 5'9", left-handed pitcher. I'm not so sure what he ever knew about hitting. And our coach was a pitching coach, Mike Dwyer. He was a guy that just worked with our. We didn't actually have a coach that, you know, worked with position players or hitters. So now they switched me from batting right-handed to switch hitter, and I don't have anybody there to help me with anything.
Right.
It was just, here you go, figure it out. So needless to say, I don't think I ever hit a home run left-handed. I couldn't even pull the ball for half a season. It was just, I was just trying to make contact.
That must have been like incredibly frustrating. Like,
Very frustrating.
why are they doing this to
But
me?
even more frustrating, when the season was over, they said, okay, you're not switch hitting anymore. Like, oh my gosh. So it was insane.
Amazing. All right, so this nucleus that's building, you know, you're one of the guys drafted, and you know, eventually, you know, there's Lou and Tram, and
Yep.
you mentioned some of the others, and Gibby comes into the picture, and the pitchers, you know, Morris and Petrie. At what point did you guys kind of start coming together in the minors, and when did you, if you remember, when did you say, you know, these guys are pretty good?
And don't forget, you were Fidrich's catcher in Lakeland, so it really goes back to that,
Wow.
too.
Yeah, well, I mean, I caught him briefly until they, you know, shot him up the ladder. But yeah, I worked with him for a while as well. Well, you know, the interesting thing is all the guys that I played with. Rosie, I caught Dave Rosema in Double-A, and he was in instructional ball a little bit. Gibby, I never played with in the minor leagues.
Okay.
Lou, I never played with in the minor leagues.
Wow.
When I was in Double-A, in what year would that have been? 74, 75, 76. Towards the end of the season, we needed a shortstop because our shortstop was injured. And we were battling for the Southern League Championship, and Les Moss was our manager. So the next thing you know, they shipped up some young kid from Bristol, Virginia, Alan Trammell. So Alan, being a rookie, just signed, you know, a couple months prior, became our shortstop throughout the end of the season and through the playoffs, and we ended up being Southern League champions with Tram as our shortstop. Jack was drafted that year, and he came onto our ball club right out of college. So, you know, once he signed, boom, they sent him to Montgomery. Steve Kemp was on that team. So there was a few guys that I actually did get a chance to play with, but a lot of them were just spread out. Petrie, Leach, Jason Thompson, a lot of those guys.
Lance, who was the left-hander you thought was going to be a good pitcher in the big leagues, and he'd never...
Bob Sykes.
Yeah, Bob Sykes.
Well, you know, in 1974, which seems like 100 years ago now, when I first signed and went to Bristol, Virginia, we had a great team. We won the Appalachian League Championship. Bob Sykes was our ace. Like Tom said, left-handed starter. Went 11-0 with like a low one-something ERA. And I thought, this guy's going to be the next Sandy Koufax. Well, as it turned out, it never panned out for him, and he ended up being moved to the Cardinals for Aurelio Lopez, I think, was in that deal, and Jerry Morales. We got both of those guys for Bob Sykes. And then later on, Bob Sykes was traded from the Cardinals to the Yankees for Willie McGee. So he figured in two big, prominent trades, but, you know, he was on the other end of those deals. But, yeah, he had just an amazing rookie year.
Jim Leland is going in the Hall of Fame. I know he managed Gibson. Did he manage you in the
I
minors?
missed him. So when he was in the organization when I signed.
Yeah.
He was managing in Clinton, Iowa, which was, at the time, Lakeland was our high A team and Clinton was our low A team. And Jim was managing the low A team in Clinton. But he was just starting out as a manager, so it's no knock against him. He obviously turned out to be pretty good.
He did.
And I got to know him early on, and he was actually down in instructional ball one year when I was there. But everywhere along the way, I always seemed to miss him and end up with somebody else. Yeah. I know when I went from A ball to double A, the organization had brought Les Moss on board, so Les Moss became my double A manager. And then the very next year, when they moved me up to AAA, they moved Les up to AAA as well, and he was the AAA manager. So, just by the way things happened to work out, I missed. But I did end up playing for Jim in Pittsburgh for a year, so we did hook up eventually.
Yeah, Hall of Famer this year. That's great. What other recollections, Tom, do you have of this team as it was growing, as it was kind of coming together? You came, 79? Were you in the...
I was up at the
77.
77.
At the end, yeah. He drove nonstop from when you were told in Evansville that you were being called up.
Yeah.
You drove overnight to get to Detroit.
Yep, stayed downtown, got up and took a cab to the ballpark because I didn't know where I was going. So
One of the reasons I got involved with the book is that because I was the beat writer in 1984, I traveled everywhere the Tigers went, and I stayed in their hotels, and I got to know so many of the guys very closely. And I thought if this publisher was wanted this book, I needed to be the person to write it because I didn't want somebody else's name on the book. Mm-hmm. And I'm very glad I did. They said that Lance was going to be involved, and Lance and I had known each other as a writer and a player, but there's always some distance between that, between those two occupations. And but I think it was really a joy to write it. It was, and in so doing, I had to call many of his teammates and the guys that I had known in the past, because in each chapter there's a sidebar, and I talked to Darrell Evans forever, and
it's the way it was,
and
still is.
And then I also had the pleasure of talking to each member of his family, so it was a very rewarding process to write this book.
So that team, there were a few prickly members from time to time. Gibby could be that way. With us, media in particular.
Absolutely.
Jack could be a real pain in the ass.
Well,
no question about it.
Jack got off to a great start in 1984, and then he leveled off. And when he leveled off, he blamed the media, and he stopped talking to us. And finally, Sparky convinced him to start talking to the media again. But when he did, I remember my competitor at the Free Press, he was able to speak to him before I did because Jack, it turned out he and I didn't get along. And he told the reporter at the Free Press, yeah, I'm talking to you guys again, but one of you guys really, really bothers me, and that's Tom Gage. He knows nothing about baseball. He should be covering shuffleboard. So, Jack and I have become friends over the years because he's mellowed since his playing days. And I told him that. I reminded him of that story one time, and we both got a good laugh about it.
Yeah, it sounds like Jack.
Yeah, it does. Yeah.
Well, you had your moments even, early in that season, he had the no-hitter at Chicago, right? But you had your moments, I imagine, on the mound, not necessarily agreeing on things. Take us through a little bit of that.
Well, you're part of a baseball team, you're part of a family. Yeah. It's like being in a marriage as well. Times aren't always great. You have, your arguments, your disagreements. Jack and I bumped heads, I'm going to say on a regular basis, but probably more often than you would imagine. And it was just and I attribute that to Jack he really truly was a great competitor, and he might have went about things a little differently than I would have liked, But, it was just the fire inside of him. And sometimes he, what they call him Mount Morris or whatever, he would erupt on occasion. And, it was my job, or at least partly my job, to try to rein him in on occasion. So, there was a few times when I went out to the mound and, things weren't going well. And I was getting irritated and everybody else was getting irritated. And I remember one time specifically, I walked out to the mound and I said, we get off of this field. I said, we get in that dugout, I'm going to kick your ass, And, it kind of got his attention. Almost, he cracked a smile like, yeah, right. But I was like, hey, focus, let's go. Come back to us and get your head in the game here. We're trying to win this game. So, it was trying to be creative on how many different ways can I get Jack refocused, as to what he's doing. And most of the time, to be, truthful, I didn't have to do that. But there were times when, he would just go off the deep end, and it was like we would all take turns running out to the mound. Yeah. Tram was, he always had some little wisecrack to make when he would come out, or Daryl, or, we always had a little saying on the ball club, if, things weren't going your way, somebody'd walk up to you and go, wah, nobody wants to hear you crying. Just, do your job.
Yeah. There's this great story, though, that we tell at every stop, that when Jack threw his no-hitter and the players were all celebrating back in the clubhouse, the phone rang at Sparky's office. And Sparky wasn't in his office. So the clubhouse kid answered the phone, and it was Jim Campbell wanting to talk to Jack and to congratulate him. So the clubhouse kid came out and didn't know which one player was Jack. So he went up to Lance and said, there's a guy on the phone, Jim Campbell, who wants to speak to you. So he mistook Lance for Jack, and Lance went and took the call. And then what happened?
Well, I got on the phone. Actually, I was shocked when,
Yeah, for sure. Have I been traded or what? Yeah.
What's going on? So I got on the phone, and he was so excited. Oh, what a great day, and everybody's so excited back here. And I go, I know everybody's excited here. It's a great deal. And he was going on, and I was thinking to myself, this is so amazing that nobody usually ever gives the catcher any credit for anything. So I thought, how awesome of my general manager to want to talk to me and congratulate me on my contribution to Jack's no-hitter. So, he's going on, and he goes, when you struck that last guy out, I about fell off my chair. And I'm like, all of a sudden, reality, it was like, when I struck that last, I go, who do you think you're talking to? And he goes, well, who is this? And I go, well, this is Lance. And he goes, well, what are you doing on the phone? And I go, well, the clubhouse guy came and got me and said you wanted to talk to me. And he goes, well, I don't want to talk to you. I want to talk to Jack. But prior to him saying that, when he was going, all googly about what a great job, there's going to be a little something extra for you in your next paycheck. And I'm thinking, oh my gosh, this is so awesome. So when he told me, I don't want to talk to you, I want to talk to Jack. And I thought, okay. I said, is there still going to be a little something in my paycheck? And he goes, get the hell off the phone and go get Jack. So I was like, all right. Now I went from being very excited about this conversation to, all right. So I slammed the phone down on the desk and I left. I just went out and started, partying with everybody else. I never did tell Jack. I just left him hanging on the phone. But eventually Jack and he hooked up. And,
See, that's why we're here. We're here for the stories. We're here for the stories, and they're in the book, The Enchanted Season, which is fantastic. And the process of writing this, what you just?
Well, we would talk to each other. I think every Tuesday, I would come up with the chapter questions and what we were going to talk about. I think I would text him on a Monday what we were going to talk about, so he had time to prepare for what the chapter was going to be about. And then we talked. I would record it, then transcribe it, and I would write the chapter. And it was a very smooth process, a very thorough. I think Lance enjoyed it. There were times he would call me back and say, and one more thing. And he did a great job of remembering what happened early in his career, not just 1984.
Right.
I had written a book with Mickey Lolich before this, and Mickey was very he was very adamant about, I don't want this to be just about 1968. I want it to be about my career. And I think Lance felt that he wanted it to be about his career in addition to 1984. 1984 was obviously the Enchanted season, but he had a great career. And, unfortunately, ended up with him leaving. We talked about that. But we also talked about, how much togetherness there was on that team. And still, these guys are still great friends with each other. They haven't lost many of those guys that were on the team. But I really admire the friendships that they still have with each other.
And we're going to talk more about your career, but tell me, because the book is coming out, you have a copy, which is beautiful, and you're going to have a bunch of appearances where the book is going to be for sale, where you guys will be there to talk about the book, Lance, to sign for the books. Yes. Tell us about what's to come.
Well, we have many stops and many events going on at different libraries around the Detroit area, starting with Centerline, but there's Grosse Pointe Historical Society. June is quite full of events, and July is filling up. I think we're both taking a little bit. I'm taking a little bit of time off in July to go to Jim Leland's induction in Cooperstown, and so July's not quite as heavy as June, but now August is filling up. So it's going to be a full summer of events and appearances. Well,
and as I remember that 84 season, when you were on the road, Tiger fans were everywhere following, the excitement that built with the 35-5 start in particular. Tiger fans have always traveled well anyway, but, boy, that was amped up. It was like a traveling road show, right?
It was.
Well, and don't forget, Sparky Anderson was a celebrity unto himself.
Sure.
I told the story the other day about, I remember when the Tigers were 34-5 going into their 40th game. And we were in Anaheim, and Sparky decided to spend the night at the team hotel the night before leaving. And a man from Dayton comes up to him and says, "Sparky Anderson, I'm from Dayton, Ohio. I was a great fan of your Big Red Machine teams." He said, "Oh, God, those were great teams. Pete Rose and all those guys and Johnny Bench." And he says, "By the way, Sparky, what are you doing now?" And he didn't even know he managed the Tigers. And Sparky goes, "Here I am. I've got the hottest. I'm managing the hottest team in baseball."
Yeah.
And the guy doesn't even know. And it was a great reminder of, Sparky had this sign in his office: every 24 hours the world turns over on you. And it reminded him to be humble about what they were doing. And of course, they went to Seattle and lost all 3 games, and that was another reminder to be humble.
Yeah.
But and then the summer was up and down. Toronto stayed close to them, and they, Dave, I think they proved themselves, not in 35-5. That was a wonderful, great, memorable start. But this team proved itself in its toughness of what happened during that summer, from in the months of May, June, July, and August, and then September they finally were able to clinch. But they had to learn. After that start, they had to learn to be tough, because Toronto had a good team.
Oh, yeah. Well, and the reality of baseball is you play every day. You got to show up, and you got to compete, and you got to grind. It is a grind.
Well, we started well, we finished well. The middle was a grind, and obviously it's what you're able to maintain throughout the majority, the middle part of the season, that actually put you in position towards the end of the season. We kept everybody healthy for the most part, which is a big factor.
Sure.
And pretty consistent. The great thing about that ball club is there was no one guy other than Willie. Willie had a great year, as far as a closer goes. but nobody had 100 RBIs. We had one 300 hitter, and that was Tram. No pitcher won 20 games. So it was, it was a total team effort in my, guesstimation. I thought that everybody made significant contributions along the way. So it was a whole team thing. So
What gets forgotten is that how much between 83 and 84 Kirk Gibson had grown up.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, 83 was a tough year for him.
Gibby had a great year in 84.
Yeah,
and
he had a grown-up year. I mean, he had really matured. He had become a team leader, I think, and it was really the year in which he emerged as a really excellent player.
Yeah.
Yeah. And obviously capped it in the World Series with the big home run.
Sure.
And then, left eventually and had that moment with the Dodgers as well. You also left. And that had to be a very
Much to my chagrin. I didn't want to leave.
a very difficult time.
Yes, absolutely.
You wanted to get paid. You wanted to get paid more, right?
Well, I mean that's kind of the whole deal.
Professional sports.
I mean, I love playing baseball, but you obviously want to be fairly compensated. I just remember, not to, put all the focus on money, but early in my career when I was trying to negotiate a contract with Mr. Campbell, it was always brought to my attention by him that, hey, you fit into a certain category based on what your peers have done, where you fit into that statistical category. Your numbers dictate what you will make the next year. So I'm like, okay, I'm good with that. Well, I had signed a 6-year contract prior to my leaving in '86 at the end of the '86 season. And I figured, you know what, I signed the deal, even though at the end of my deal, I was vastly underpaid, compared to, if you're comparing me to other people in my position. So I figured, hey, I signed the contract, I'm not gonna say a word, I'm gonna honor this, and when it expires, Tigers will take care of me. Well, when it expired, the whole tune of that changed. And collusion became a big factor and other things. And it was like, you know what? I just felt like Mr. Campbell was not being very fair. And he almost forced me out the door. It was like, I think he put me in a corner and just said, make a decision.
Well, in spring training, you had talked to him about extending the contract.
Well, I had an
right?
extension. My agent negotiated an extension in spring of '86, and it was ready to be signed. And before I could get my name on the contract, the Tigers pulled it off the table.
And the thing is, in '86, you had a great first half of the season.
I did.
Yeah, and then you hurt your back.
I hurt my back,
Yeah.
which didn't help things any.
Yeah.
But, they pulled that contract off the table and said, we'll negotiate with you at the end of the season. And I'm like, what happened?
Yeah.
And then I got off to a great start in '86. I probably had my best numbers going into the All-Star break.
By the end of the
Production-wise.
season, you had better numbers than most catchers in in your half season. You had a better.
Well, I brought that up.
Yeah.
Because when it came down to it, when the negotiations, and I was a free agent.
Yeah.
But there was really no free agency because of what was going on. So, Mr. Campbell, Mr. LaJoy through, Bill LaJoy through Jim Campbell said, we're prepared to offer you same amount of money, 1-year deal, what you made last year. And I'm like, wait a minute. I just had this contract in spring training that was substantially more than this. You're going to give me a 1-year deal and you're not going to give me a $1 raise from what I did. I said, I realized I only played half a year, but my numbers for that half a year are better than most catchers in the major leagues that played a full year. And I don't get a $1 raise. I said, I'm not doing it. I'm not doing it. And if that's the stance you're going to take, if anybody offers me anything, I'm out of here. I said, because I can't believe that you would do that to me, number one. But they stood their ground, and they would not budge. It wasn't until later on that, they started saying, well, we'll offer you arbitration. I go, I'm not going to arbitration. Even though I probably could have made out better in arbitration.
Right.
But I was like, you know what, I'm not, you guys put me in this position. I'm not going down that road. Just in case something might happen, you got something up your sleeve. I just wanted them to treat, if you're only going to sign me to a 1-year deal, I want to be treated fairly. I want to be paid what I'm worth.
What's interesting, though, in talking to your family, and I talked to his daughter and his sons and his mother. The allegiance, even now, even though he played for the Phillies and the Angels, quite a number of years for the Angels, the allegiance is to the Tigers. Everybody in your family is a Tiger fan.
What's a Tiger on?
And fans were disappointed that happened. It happened with you. It happened with Jack too. I mean, it's like, yeah, loyalty at some point is supposed to mean something, right? Both ways, But
I discovered early on there's no loyalty in baseball for the most part. I would say it never exists, but it was rarely a thing.
But a difficult decision, even with those feelings, to say I'm leaving the Tigers and I'm going someplace else and starting over.
Well, like I said, the Tigers were my family.
Yeah.
I mean, I grew up with these guys in the minor leagues, and early in our careers, we won a world championship together. I wasn't particularly looking to go anywhere. My wife and I loved it in Michigan, loved it in the organization. We had a lot of things going on off the field. I had no desire to go anywhere else, but it was almost like I was pushed into that circumstance, that situation, and it was very frustrating. I will say that, but it is what it is.
But I think one of the great things, Lance, is, and this speaks on behalf of the loyalty of the fans, is that they still identify you as part of the core of that team.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Without question.
Absolutely.
Fans have always been great to me, and I appreciate that.
So, I can't read my own writing here. 1,782 hits, 324 home runs, career batting average 252, over 1,070 runs batted in. Your home runs 324, fifth all time among all catchers in Major League Baseball.
Well, he had the American League record for home runs by catchers for a while. I don't know if it's been broken since.
Eight-time All-Star, 3-time Gold Glove winner, 6-time Silver Slugger, in addition to the World Series championship. The one year you were on the Hall of Fame ballot, you got minuscule, voting. Guys like Tom Gage are responsible for that.
I didn't vote for you.
But when you look at the numbers and catchers and all time, I mean, this guy Tom
absolutely
stacks up.
I remember
stacks
that.
Up
I remember
well.
that Hall of Fame voting process because I think you and Gibson and Lou were all on the ballot that same year, and none of you made it to the second. Got 5% of the vote.
It was one and done. It was
Yeah. And the list of players who didn't get 5% and were lopped off the first ballot. If you look over the years of who they were, they're almost a Hall of Fame unto itself.
Yeah.
And when you think that Lou didn't make it and Gibson didn't make it and Lance didn't make it, even to a second ballot, I'm kind of embarrassed to say I was part of the voting block of voters who prevented them from advancing.
Yeah.
I've always thought if I stayed in Detroit, I would have had a much better chance. Obviously things went a little south when I went to Philadelphia and elsewhere. I mean, I had a couple good years, but nothing like I was doing consistently with the Tigers. So it's I blame myself for that, but. I had a great career, fun career. At least in my own mind, I had a great career.
Hey.
So it was enjoyable. I get it. There's got to be a cutoff point somewhere. When you're picking Hall of Fame guys. So if I'm close or knocking on the door, I'm okay with that.
Well, Gary Carter, his career batting average was 262, right around the same number of home runs.
Exactly.
He had more. He had more hits.
Yeah. But he played more games.
He played a lot more games, and he played in New York.
Yeah.
Let's remember. You know what I mean? So, I don't know if you've lost sleep over any of that, but I mean, your career stacks up. With the many of the best players ever at your position.
Just recently I've been looking over a list of players who played a long time as Tigers. Mm-hmm. And Bobby Higginson played 11 years for the Tigers, and he was only one of, I think, of 11 players who ever did that. So, what you should have done, not many have done. And that would have been playing a decade for the same team. The Trammels and the Whitakers are the real exceptions.
So speaking of that, Jack is in the Hall of Fame.
Yes.
Good for him. Tram is in the Hall of Fame. Good for him. Lou should be in the Hall of Fame.
I agree. Said that all along.
Yeah.
You know, his numbers are better than some guys that are actually in the Hall of Fame. So how do you justify that? I don't think you can.
Let's hope through the Veterans Committee that he gets in someday, Tom?
Well, I think he has a chance. You know, I've often said it's not the second base Hall of Fame, but in examining Lou Whitaker's stats in his career, he belongs. He really does. The thing is, Lou didn't, unlike Alan Trammell, Lou didn't make many friends among opposing players. He wasn't an outgoing guy. He didn't have, you know, I don't know if he was good friends with Robin Yount as Tram was or George Brett, but these are the guys who were eventually on the committee that elected Tram into the Hall of Fame. And I'm not saying Tram doesn't belong, but he laid the groundwork by being a good friend of the guys who eventually voted for him. And Lou was much more inward, much more introspective, and not as outgoing. And I think I think unfortunately he's paying the price for that.
Yeah, but in terms of that double play combination, I mean, you know, it's unlike, you know, anything we've seen many times before in Major League Baseball. And again, as you say, his numbers stack up with, you know, the best players at his position. I mean,
Well, I don't think it should be held against Lou that he was just a quiet guy.
No,
You know, he wasn't very talkative.
Yeah.
You know, even in our clubhouse, you know, we all obviously had a relationship with Lou, but he was a very quiet guy.
Yeah.
He went out and did his job day in and day out, never caused any problems, and just was a great, consistent player, I thought.
I think an argument can be made that he was one of the greatest half dozen players in Tiger history. I really do.
yeah.
I can't argue that. I've seen him do some things.
Oh yeah. Well, but he kind of seemed to leave you always wanting more though, because you felt he was capable, you know, because of those spectacular moments that happened, you know, the great ball player that he was. It was almost like
He was so natural. He
Yes.
didn't need a lot of batting practice.
Right.
You know, if who was it? Who was the guy who used to throw batting?
Whitmer.
Dan Whitmer. And Dave Bergman used to love to face him in batting practice because Whitmer would throw fastballs. But Lou didn't want any
Firm.
part. Yeah.
Yeah.
He didn't want any part of it.
Well, I remember a stretch during one of the seasons, I don't remember which one, but Lou got irritated at somebody and refused to take batting practice. He just said, I'm not taking batting practice anymore, because he was just pissed. And it was like, well, so what was Sparky going to do? I was like, okay, well, then don't take batting practice. Well, all he did was go out and hit better than everybody on the team for that stretch, and he never took batting practice. So when somebody says batting practice is overrated, well, I guess Lou's exhibit A for that.
I think you guys have always paid a price for not being, and an unfair price for not being an East Coast team. And, you know, Detroit is in the Midwest, and 84 got a lot of attention in 84, but since isn't remembered, I think, by many as one of the great teams of baseball, and it was.
Oh, absolutely. And that's always something that irritated me when they would go down the list of all the great teams throughout history. What about the 84 Tigers?
Right.
I mean, we did set a franchise record for wins, and we did start out 35-5, which I don't think anybody will ever do again. Right. And we have a few representatives in the Hall of Fame from that team, maybe a couple other guys that might deserve to go in eventually. But I just thought that year, in fact, I just talked to Brett Boone last week. Brett Boone was a part of the 2001 Seattle Mariner team that won 116 games.
And didn't get to the World Series.
They didn't get to the World. And I told him the same thing. My biggest fear when we started the playoffs was, if we don't win it all, this is all going to be for nothing.
Yeah.
And you guys won 116 games and didn't win it all. How many people talk about the 2001 Seattle Mariners? The Yankees knocked them out of the playoffs. So
Yeah, if you were the New York Tigers or the Los Angeles Tigers, it would have been one of the great teams of all time.
Well, and you would argue it still is.
Yeah.
I absolutely do.
Yeah. The Enchanted Season is the book. You're going to have these signings, these appearances coming up through June, July, and August. End of August, the team's going to come back together. There's going to be a celebration at Comerica Park as well. I'm sure you're looking forward to that.
Absolutely. Well, we don't often get the opportunity to get together anymore, and it's only through the ball club's efforts really to, bring us all back from all parts of the country so that we can be in one place and, have an opportunity to reminisce and, talk about not only what's going on in our lives nowadays, but relive that Enchanted season and what went on in '84. Because, everybody's got stories. Everybody remembers, the different things that went on. So it's fun to sit around and reminisce, not only with the guys, but their families. And so we're all looking forward to that.
So that's the end of August. It's a 3-day weekend kind of thing?
30th and the 31st of August and the 1st of September. It's a 3-day event. Wow. I don't know exactly what the program is, but they will be, celebrating our '84 championship for those 3 days.
40 years. 40 years.
Well, and not only that, but we did have the pleasure of having Dick Trzaskowski do the forward.
Nice.
And he played for the '68 team and coached for the '84 team. Yeah. So he's a great connection between the great generations of Tiger teams.
Yeah.
Well, very loved guy on our coaching
Trixie,
staff.
yeah.
He was a fun guy.
Yeah. Well, Billy Consolo, and you guys.
We had some characters on the staff too.
You guys gave those guys some grief too, didn't you? Day after day after day, as I recall.
Absolutely.
And Sparky, of
part
course.
of the deal.
Yeah, the ringleader of it
Part
all.
of the experience.
Yeah, and sadly, he won't be part of this celebration, Sparky. But boy, the role that he played also, in those building years and to 84.
Well, everybody's got a Sparky story or two, so he figures pretty prominently in all of our baseball memories, and even when Tram was managing, he couldn't stop talking about I learned this from Sparky, I learned this Sparky did, so he and Gibby both, and that's a great tribute to Sparky. He was not only a great leader but a great teacher, and I think everybody has very fond memories of him.
So, Tom, the people that want to pick up the book and maybe show up for one of the appearances, the signings, where do they go for information?
Put the schedule on Facebook, and you can get the schedule through Triumph Publishing.
Okay.
And again.
And we'll put the link in the show notes, too, so people can see it
But
as
really,
well.
there are regular appearances throughout the summer.
Yeah, excellent. We look forward to that.
Yeah.
Thank you for the time today. Once again, the book is The Enchanted Season. You can get it at Amazon, your favorite bookseller, for sure, and maybe a conversation and an autograph along the way from these two gentlemen. Tom Gage, longtime baseball writer for the Detroit News, author of the book with Lance Parrish. Thank you for the time today. Thanks for reminiscing with me about this Enchanted season.
Exactly.
It's always a joy to talk about it.
You bet.
All right. Lance, Tom, thank you very much. And as always, we thank you for joining us for the Dave LewAllen Podcast. We'll see you next time. In the meantime, stay safe, be kind.